Hello, everyone, and welcome to another 30 for 30. That's right, 30 episodes of Set Listing Bruce in 30 days, where we are taking a breakdown of Bruce's albums, one album at a time. And joining me today is my good friend. We just spent another 10 or 15 minutes that you guys won't get to hear catching up. But Craig Colby is here. Craig, welcome back to the podcast.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Jesse.
Yes. How are you working on a second book, or are you still just promoting your Caps book?
I am working on a second book. I expect it to be out in the spring. And the second story in the book will be a story called 12 Seconds with the Boss. It is about meeting Bruce Springsteen at his book signing, which I thought would be a nothing event, and it turned into something remarkably different. So there
Ooh,
will be a little bit of Bruce Springsteen in the book.
nice. It is always good to hear from you. By the way, I'm going to let you promote in a minute toward the end, but All Caps Story That Justify an Outrageous Hat Collection is Craig's book. And you go, how can you write a book just about baseball caps? But it is an amazing biography told through baseball caps. And it is one of my favorite books. I just adore
I
it.
so appreciate that. I so appreciate that.
Yeah.
I try to do what Bruce Springsteen does, which is write about me, but make you think about you. That's a North Star I go by. It's hard to do.
Yeah. We're recording this the morning after the Road Diary debuted. Have you gotten a chance to see it yet?
I have not because as a baseball fan, I had to watch game one of the World Series and I was glad I did.
Yeah, I did not watch it. I'm still feeling happy that the Rangers won the World Series, though I do feel like they sold their soul because this was a horrible season for the Rangers. But I am going to go back and catch some of the games because I know that um, I've heard a couple of cynical people going, this is what the network wants. I thought last year's World Series, because I'm biased, was a great World Series. Forget, but yeah, it is cool to have the Dodgers and the Yankees playing, and
And the
and
two
there's some,
biggest stars in the game.
yeah, exactly.
Once my Tigers were eliminated, this is
Yeah,
what I wanted.
yeah, that sounds good. All right, let's go ahead and give you a chance. Tell us a little bit about yourself in case someone has not listened to your earlier episodes.
I'm a television producer, executive producer. My work has been seen all over the world. I like to say that if there's a country with television sets, one of my shows has been on it. It's been on Smithsonian Channel, Discovery Channel. I spent 10 years at Discovery Channel in Canada. I've worked in sports. Now I have my own production company and consulting company called Colby Vision. I've worked with the National Lacrosse League. I'm a consultant for the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto, and I am working on an astronomy series with a couple of very talented friends right now. Hopefully that'll be out to you soon.
Man, I just love the diversity of your output, right? You find a way to tell great stories.
I
Yeah,
love it. That's what I live for.
yeah. One of the things that when you get a chance to see the documentary, he does address the set list and why he told the story. And you were a wonderful guest last year when there was the set list controversy about not changing it, and I believe the story was what Bruce is trying to tell us. It's a great episode, and I think you will feel like, yep, I got it right when you hear Little Steven and Bruce and them talk about it. So,
I'm glad to hear that, and that's what I'm looking forward to most in this doc is
yeah.
to see how close to the center of that bullseye I was.
Yeah, I think you were pretty darn close. So, Craig, what album do you want to talk about today?
I want to talk about my favorite album of all time. Nothing will ever supplant it, and the one that made me a passionate Bruce Springsteen fan. I want to talk about Darkness on the Edge of Town.
Way to pick an obscure album that a lot of people don't talk about.
Yeah, I got in early because, and I've listened to your show and I know your guests, and I don't feel worthy to be the person to talk about this, but I have some squatters' rights. I got in early and this was my request.
I do want to say that did feel like when I first announced this, I think you were one of the first people that responded and said, like, I'll take darkness. right? This quick, it almost, and even though it's on text, it did feel like you were like the youngest kid jumping in the front seat going, dibs.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It's exactly what it was.
So let's talk about why this album. And go ahead and you've shared a little bit how it's your favorite album, but let's talk a little bit why it is your favorite album and why you wanted to discuss it.
So I got into Bruce Springsteen, like a lot of people, in 1984 when Born in the USA came out. Of course, I was aware of Bruce Springsteen and his music before that. There hadn't been a song that really caught me yet. As much as I liked it, there wasn't anything that spoke to me. So my brother Scott and I picked up Born in the USA. We listened to it and we loved it, and we thought we got to dig back a little bit. So I picked up Born to Run, and he picked up Darkness on the Edge of Town. And we listened to Born to Run, and I thought it was fantastic, and I loved it. And then when we dropped the needle on Badlands, that was the moment. That was the moment that I felt like he was singing about the way that I felt about my life. And I had never had that experience before. And that's when I went, oh, this guy is talking to me and is brilliant and all of those. And I just listened to the album over and over and over again. There's a painting in my living room based on the Promised Land, the dark cloud rising from the desert floor, and my bags packed walking into the storm. My dad painted that for me. That lyric means so much to me. In hard times, which we've all had in the last 4 years, I look at that painting and I think about those lyrics, and I think about the commitment to what you want to do, what you think is right in your life, despite the adversity. I love that the album starts with defiance and ends with resignation. Even though you can see there's still defiance in Darkness on the Edge of Town. But I also think if you're out under the bridge and you've lost everyone, but you're going to keep doing it, there's a resignation to this is what life is about. So I think there's a whole span of the human condition that I relate to most that's in this album. That's why I love it and why I will always love it.
I love that, and you'll have to send me a picture of the painting, and I'll use that as the podcast art for this episode if
I
you don't
definitely
mind.
will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have it
Uh,
on my Facebook page, so I'll flip it over right away.
That sounds great. I We were joking. We were heading to I think it was the Working on the Dream tour in Houston because he didn't come to Dallas. It was either Magic or Work on a Dream. So I think it was Working on a Dream. And my buddy Sam was driving, and he joked about that it felt like every fourth song on E Street Radio was Badlands, right? He just was, I'm like, I'm so tired of Badlands. And when the band came out, they opened with Badlands, and he looked over at me and go, okay, Bruce was listening in the car. I think there are certain songs that are repeat proof. In other words, no matter how many times you hear them, you go, it feels new to you each time. And I think Badlands is one of those songs. I love hearing it live. I hear it in the studio. And I also think it's fascinating. I'd love for your thoughts on you'll hear the old archives that when it's first getting played, the the audience isn't singing along during that instrumental, and then over the years, and now then that's a staple when he does that, everyone's screaming along. So any thoughts on Badlands as we kick off our discussion?
It's my favorite song. I love it, and I know what you mean. I think that singing along really took off after the Barcelona concert that we all got to see. And we
Yeah.
saw how the Spaniards responded to it. Yeah, I love that song. It's my favorite song. And again, that's the one that always sticks to me. And I do think it's repeat proof. I don't know if it sounds new, but it's certainly resonates.
Hmm.
It's very resonant. I think
Yeah.
it's one of the songs, and this is one of the albums that is the most Bruce Springsteen songs and the most Bruce Springsteen albums. I find among the hardcore Springsteen fans like you and me that you often find that Darkness on the Edge of Town is their favorite album. And I think
Yes.
there are a few reasons for that. You find very few people among the hardcore Springsteen fans who want to admit that Born in the USA is their biggest hit because it was so popular.
Right.
There's a bit of snobbery amongst ourselves for that. I think nobody can deny the greatness of Born to Run, but at the same time, those are things that feel like they belong to everybody. And this is
Right.
the one that feels like it belongs to us. And I think there's a few reasons for that. I'm going to dig into my research for a minute if that's okay.
Please. No, that sounds perfect.
When he released this album, he did things that prevented it from being too popular. This song wasn't so much built as it was distilled. He recorded 60 songs and then he picked his 10 toughest ones. He threw out the ones he thought would be hits, subsequently became hits for other people. Fire was on this album that went to the Pointer Sisters. Because the Night went to Patti Smith, threw them out. You hear Stephen Van Zandt talk about how I think crazy mad he was for Bruce not making something of those songs himself, but that wasn't where he wanted to go. He also asked the record company not to promote the album so hard because I think he was stung by the backlash he faced from the two Time magazine covers and all of that. So it was pretty clear he was, after 3 albums of trying to become a popular musician, he really wanted to be an artist. Maybe for his fans, maybe to show people, maybe for himself. And for him, I think this was the one where he wanted to make an artistic statement. And when you look at it's hard to call this album unpopular. It sold 3,500,000 copies at least. I added it all up from the main countries. It reached number 5, although he's used to being number 4. I think it peaked 5 USA Billboard, 4 in the Netherlands, 7 in Canada. But as far as singles, Prove It All Night went to 33, Badlands went to 42, and The Promised Land was released in the UK and Ireland and didn't even chart. So as far as making inroads with a mass audience after Born to Run, this was not designed for that. It didn't even get the fantastic critical reviews that it got later. It got good ones. Somebody in Philadelphia gave it 1 star. I don't know what that guy was thinking.
Wow.
But that may be what Bruce was worried about, was people going, I'm going to show this guy, right? This guy,
Yeah.
future of rock and roll. Let me see. Bruce really had a vision with this album, and I think for him, it was taking away some of the romanticism and distilling who he was and what he thought life was all about, what he really saw in people. You can't run away, right? You can't escape it. Eventually, you're going to have to face everything life is going to shove in your face. And how do you do that? And I think that's what this album is. And I think that's why Bruce Springsteen fans who love Bruce Springsteen, not just for the sound of the music, but because we share his values. We have shared values among our fan base. I think this album best represents those values.
As you were talking, I looked just to remind myself, and I go, okay, Badlands, pretty common live song. Promised Land, pretty common live song. Prove It All Night.
The third and fourth most played songs live are The Promised Land and then Badlands after Born to Run and Thunder Road.
And so when people talk about Bruce doing the hits, commercially, no. But from fans, it absolutely is. I remember working on the Dream tour when he started doing album shows, right? That people were, when he was going to do Darkness from beginning to end, it's like, oh, that's a hot ticket, right? So yeah, I think it is the thing. To me, Tunnel of Love, push comes to shove, I would put that as my favorite album. But I think that's because it speaks to me. Just I love the, I guess because of it, I remember just loving the song. And I've mentioned that I think that Tunnel Love is a song that, or a album that you either have to have been in a long-term relationship or have your heart broken multiple times to speak to me. But yes, I think ultimately when people push comes to shove, even though Born to Run has that iconic song, Thunder Road, Jungle Ant, all these others, Darkness somehow beats it out as an album. And I think you articulate it really well, right? It's because maybe it's the, and hate to pardon the pun, but it's the darkness, because often we spend more time feeling not necessarily depressed, but feeling the struggle more than we do the joy.
Oh, I think there's a lot of truth in that. First of all, good choice on Tunnel of Love. Tunnel of Love was the first Bruce album that I looked forward to and couldn't wait to play and was
Yeah,
blown away by it. But I think certainly Bruce has been pretty clear about the darkness he feels. But
yeah,
I think a lot of our life is the fight against the darkness.
yeah.
And no matter how well off we are, and I mean that generally as a society, in Western society, we're far better off than the rest of the world. There are things in your life that come after you, keep you down.
Yeah.
And we do give those a lot of room in our head and in our heart. And this album is, I wouldn't say the antidote, but it gives you some of the tools to fight back against that. And
The
you can't have the light without the dark.
no.
You cannot have the light without the dark.
Yeah, you can't appreciate the good unless there's the bad. And not that I'm embracing the bad, but I just understand that that journey is what it's about. I think it's interesting too that a couple of years ago I had 7 or 8 fans on, and we did the tournament style, right? We did all this, and Racing in the Street ended up being the top song among our discussions. And all of us agreed it was the right choice, but we were all surprised because we figured that with, unless something, even if Born to Run and Thunder Road ended up being against each other as the number 1 or number 2 seed, that you would think one of those would come up. And Racing in the Street ended up winning. And I don't disagree with that.
He stares off alone into the night with the eyes of one who hates for just being born.
Yeah.
Some of the most beautiful, haunting lyrics on this album that really paint you a picture of these lives. So,
And, and I remember when I bought this album after The River was the first Springsteen album I bought. And of course, loved Out in the Street and the actual Hungry Heart because it's on the radio, the story of the river. You start going back catalog, and loved obviously Born to Run, and just would made a point of any time I was going to go on a road trip, that would be the first song I would play. Just going that. But when I heard Darkness, what struck me most is Racing in the Street, because at that time, and still am, huge Brian Wilson Beach Boy fan. And I felt like Racing in the Street was quote unquote an adult Beach Boy song. Like it
yeah.
was, because it wasn't Little Deuce Coupe fun, all these car songs, that all of a sudden it's like this, the person who was talking about My Little Deuce Coupe and Shut Down and all these car songs that the Beach Boys embraced, all of a sudden it was this adult version of Racing in the Street. And
Well,
it, go ahead.
oh no, I didn't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
And there's that, oh, I can't think of the character in American Graffiti, the one that's a little bit older that says rock and roll has gone to shit since Buddy Holly died. I thought of that kind of character. And our friend of the podcast, UK Mark, talked about that when he was a kid, he got for his birthday the live set, and Racing in the Street spoke to him because he said, even as a young kid, you could come home from school, feel defeated because of the bad day, or you could literally set yourself up to go racing in the street or to go and choose another path. And I thought that was fascinating. Someone like that's not even in middle school, hearing those lyrics and knowing you have a choice to stay defiant or and keep trying, or just let it all, sit around.
Middle school is tough, man. Middle school is
It
tough.
is.
I don't remember where I read this, but I did read it. that Racing in the Street was a response song, an answer song to Dancing in the Street. Because for Springsteen, we're not out there dancing in the street. There are people living these desperate lives that are defeated by the economy, by relationships. And what they do is they go out and they take their pain and put it somewhere. But I think you get to a great point there. When I run into problems, and there's only one question you ever ask yourself, and that's, what are you going to do? Right? What are you going to do? And there's a whole lot of what are you going to do in this album, right? You're going to pack your bags and head straight into the storm, right? You're going to meet me in the field behind the dynamo, right? You're going to race in the street. You're going to be on that hill with everything you got, right? To me, I think that's where this album was. And when you talk about the darkness versus the light, this album is a million miles away from sugar, right? Which
Yeah.
is, it's all great. Everything is awesome. This is the opposite of that.
And I remember, I'm going back to what you said a few minutes ago about little Steven being frustrated. The Promise documentary that came on, and by the way, I love that 2 CD, set that it's a shame that they weren't able to tour and do some of those songs, right? On those, because there's some great songs on that.
Mm-hmm.
But Steven said, in another world, or if Bruce wanted, he could have been one of the best pop song writers in the world, right? He could have been Stephen Lehrer or Carole King and Goffin King, right? He could have if he wanted, but that wasn't his calling.
The one time he was called to do it,
Yeah,
everyone knows this story, right? Was on Born in the USA when John Landau said, I want a hit record. I want a hit
yeah,
song. And this is my career too, and I want a hit. So he went home mad and came back with the highest charting song he ever wrote. If you want to write a pop song, boy, can he ever write a pop song. And we wrote on this album, he wrote those pop songs that were hits for other people, big hits. Like how many other, I'm not slamming the Pointer Sisters, but
right.
how many other Pointer Sister songs can you name? I can name probably two
Yeah,
other than Fire. And
yeah,
I love the Pointer Sisters. But as
yeah. I
far
know
as
what you're
charting
saying.
things,
Yeah,
he helped Patti Smith.
yeah.
Like he helped make people's careers with the songs he didn't use.
And I love that when he always talks about, he calls it their song, right? That he gives Patty full credit to fleshing it out and making it what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, I think it's fascinating that, and once again, I'm always fascinated. Growing up, I grew up in the Baptist church. And so there are certain Bible verses that are burned into me. And I'm going to misquote it, but all things work well for those who love the Lord, something along that lines. And I wonder, if you think about, if Michael Pell wasn't part of his life, he may have never gotten discovered. That's true. He could be,
Pell helped him a lot.
yeah.
He could
And
have been
then
obscure.
then there's the relationship fractions. And then you have the lawsuit. Without the lawsuit, this all combination would have we gotten darkness, right? It, because of those factors, the idea of not being able to record, the frustration, you wonder, like, how was the Promise not on this album, right? Because it is such, it is almost the sequel to Thunder Road, which, and but instead he picks, as you say, the 10 songs. He had such a clear vision, which goes back to last year's tour, right? He came into this thing with a clear vision of, this is the show I want to perform. This is the story I want to tell. And Darkness, he had a clear, this is the story I want to tell, which I think is amazing.
I read something in my research for this show that I didn't want to come in with just my feelings, and I looked it up. Somebody said that this is back in the album days before CDs, side one and side two are parallels of each other. I'm a big fan as a writer of parallel construction. So if you look at it, and I'm going to walk us through it now. First song on both sides, Badlands to Promised Land. right? Both songs of defiance, right? The second one is Adam Raised a Cain on side one and Factory on side two. That is parental suffering, right? Third song on side one is Something in the Night. Third song on side two is Streets of Fire. And there are a certain amount of raging against society and oppression, and the place you're put are in both of those things. You're born with nothing and better off that way, right? Cut four on side one is Candy's Room. Cut four on side two is Prove It All Night. They are both about a seductive relationship with a woman, right? Stories aren't exactly the same, but that's what it is, right? And then the last one on side one is Racing in the Streets, which is resignation but commitment to your fate, to what you're going to do about it, and Darkness on the Edge of Town. So when I saw that, I went, oh my God, that is some excellent analysis. So as far as I just picked 10 songs, maybe, and I don't know if this is subconscious, I would think not, given how thoughtful Springsteen is, but this is a very thoughtfully put together album.
Candy's Room and Prove It All Night is the weakest link in my mind, though now I need to listen to both of them and rethink. But I absolutely can see the link. But every other, I agree, it's a slam dunk. Racing in the Street, Darkness on the Edge of Town, both this what are you going to do? And I do think this is going to be, I don't know if I'm being overly hyperbole, but Darkness on the Edge of Town is as good a title as you can ever have.
Yeah, let's talk about those titles too.
Yes.
The same is true on Born to Run. But
yeah.
Every single one of these titles you can see on a movie poster. Like there is some tension in almost all of them. The Promised Land is the one that sort of feels like it has the least story or conflict in it, except when you know the story of the Promised Land, Moses never got in. It was a struggle to get there. So every Badlands, Adam Raised a Cain, Something in the Night. What is that thing? Candy's Room. There's a forbiddenness to that. Even that it's Candy's Room, this very sweet sounding name in an isolated place. Racing in the Street, obviously, the Promised Land, Factory, right?
Yeah.
That one word title that suggests struggle, labor. Streets of Fire, obviously that was a movie. Prove It All Night, one of my favorite titles, right? Prove It All Night.
Yeah.
And I love the story about how he came up with that one from the cab driver.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Darkness on the Edge of Town, which is a film noir title, if ever there was one.
One of my other podcasts is with my friend Lou and Karen, and we're going through Babylon 5. It's a rewatch for me. It's a new watch for them. And every time I see all the titles that J. Michael Straczynski did, I'm like, man, Darkness on the Edge of Town sounds like it could be an episode that's written for him. And it is a movie, right? I know that for a while, the Arrow TV series, their next to last episode was always named after a Springsteen episode, song title. So they did Streaks of Fire, they did Darkness on the Edge of Town, and I tried to reach out to the writers room and go, okay, look, you guys have got to join me on the podcast. Whoever's coming up with these titles and often when we're having these discussions, we'll talk about highlights and we'll talk about lowlights. I don't know if there is a weak song on this album.
I would say that there is not.
Yeah. And talk to me about your feelings on Factory. I liked Factory, but I heard what made it a little bit better for me is I heard, and I cannot remember who it was, but I heard a female group do an a cappella version of it. And it woke me up to this different kind of perspective on it. Talk to me a little bit about Factory.
I came to this album, my summer job, same summer job my brothers had, and my younger brother's going to be on your show talking about the Broadway album. We worked at a grain elevator. We live in Thunder Bay, Ontario, which is on top of Lake Superior, and grain from Western Canada would come in on trains, be dumped, stored in the grain elevator, put in a malt house because it was for beer, and
Mhm.
then it would be put into ships. So it was a hard hat, steel toed boots labor job that we were extremely lucky to have and paid for our education, but it was still a useful introduction into blue collar work, which
Yeah.
none of us were going to be doing for our careers. And I have a great admiration for blue collar workers, but
Yeah.
it certainly was a step into that life. And I related to a lot of factory, and I saw people that I worked with. A lot had great lives and very happy, but there was some desperation there. I don't know if it's related to the job or not, but these aren't what you would call career fulfilling jobs. This is
Yeah.
work, right? It's work. You're there to work. So I really related to factory in that way. I had to wear the hearing protection. Factory takes his hearing, gives him life. Having worn those boots and that hard hat, I totally relate to factory. And I can relate to the young Bruce Springsteen looking at his father going to those jobs. And Bruce Springsteen's dad suffered from an undiagnosed depression, which was the
Right.
cause of those things. But I can certainly see young Bruce Springsteen making the link to his father's unhappiness and the working conditions he was in.
Y- Yes. And I, when I hear this and I think of Jason Isbell's lyrics of Something More Than Free, where on Sundays I'm too tired to go to church, but I'm thankful for the work, right? Idea that, and this is not certainly unique to me because I think many people talk about it, right? The very thing that gives you life is also hurting you physically, hurting you mentally. I often joke that sometimes there'll be some cynicism. You shouldn't be complaining about your job because there's a lot of people would be happy to have that job. And you're going, I just because I'm complaining about a situation at work doesn't mean I'm not happy that I'm employed, right? There you can hold two thoughts in your mind.
That's true of everything. That's the beauty of this album, and that's true of everything. I think for individuals, our strengths are our weaknesses as well, right? They're both the same thing. And just because, when I talked to a friend of mine from high school who has suffered severe concussion, she can't work anymore. She cut off part of her finger. Her husband left her. She has real problems. And I was talking to her, and she was trying to say, well, I'm happy for this. I'm happy for this. I said, you don't have to do that. Like, your problems are your problems, and they're important because they're important to you. Just because somebody has bigger problems doesn't mean that yours are not valid and they don't deserve your attention and your care and the feelings they create inside of you. You could pick any of the characters in this song and go, what are you whining about? I think there's some of that in society, but I think what this gets to is an artist, a sensitive artist, looking at the things that can consume us if we let them. When we
Yeah.
talk about the hard song to listen to, the one that took me the longest to come to was Adam Raised a Cain,
Okay.
because it was, I think, because of the violent way it sounded,
Yeah.
was at odds with the rest of it. It took me a while to come to that. But when I did, when it really landed, which was probably you're born into this life paying for the sins of somebody else's past, I realized it had to sound the way it did to convey the feeling it did of anger, right? It's an
Hmm.
angry song about someone whose biggest problems are ones that have been passed down to
Yeah. And it's just there. Any song that we haven't talked about, you still want to?
them. Boy, I could talk about all of them. I would say the
Yes.
ones that love them all.
Yeah.
Something in the Night. I have trouble describing what it's about. It's a lot of images. I think the same is for Streets of Fire. I
Yeah.
think it's that feeling of desperation. I agree that the tie between Candy's Room and Prove It All Night are not as strong as the other ones. I just think Candy's Room, especially, it's not really about Bruce. I mean, if you dig into it a little bit, it's about a woman with a sugar daddy,
Yeah.
and but she really wants to be with the young man,
Yeah.
and it's actually somebody else's desperation.
Yeah.
Um, I think they're all fantastic. I could talk about Prove It All Night forever. I briefly referenced the story about how that song came about. And for anybody who doesn't know, Bruce was in a cab ride. He was talking to the cab driver, and the cab driver was saying, you got to prove it all day in your work, and then you got to go home to your wife and your mother, and you got to prove it all night to them. And that was the inspiration for that song. And boy, did he turn that into something special.
Yeah. And I love the Promised Land, right? It is, and whether it's the full band, whether it's acoustical, he'll often play it when he's doing a solo show. And it you almost could do, I just think it's a really one of his strongest songs. And that I believe in a promised land. To have that faith, that dream, despite the darkness, part of the pun on this album, right? That I still believe. Similar to Nebraska, A Reason to Believe. Even though
Mm-hmm.
it's a very bleak song, sometimes people still have the feeling. I remember there was a line in West Wing where they were talking about the estate tax, the death tax. And they said so many people, it will never affect them, but they have a strong feeling about it. And someone said, because one day they hope they will be rich. They
Yeah.
have that because that's part of the American dream
Mm-hmm.
is you do have that potential to do that. So yeah, I'm so glad we got to spend some time talking about the song, the whole album. Any final thoughts as we wrap it up?
I just want to go back to notes on the Promised Land.
Yeah.
I saw Bruce at the Invictus Games concert here in Toronto. And
Wow.
I took my friend Jill Deacon, who's a CBC radio host. She and I worked together at Discovery Channel, and she'd had me on a couple times to talk about Bruce Springsteen after the book signing
Yeah.
and coming up to the Invictus Games. And my wife couldn't go at the last minute, so I brought Jill, who had never seen Bruce Springsteen. And he played 4 songs. He started with Promised Land, solo acoustic, and then for some reason he did work on the highway. But he came out and sang Promised Land solo, and it's the first song that Jill had ever heard him sing.
Wow.
And I remember I'd heard that song a million times, but as you said earlier, it was like the first time I'd heard it, and it was such a different interpretation. It had so much more tenderness and introspection. And I looked over at Jill, and her jaw was open.
Yeah.
Like, it's what just happened here. I don't think you can find that online. He later did Cuts Like a Knife in Badlands with Bryan Adams at that concert. And
Wow.
you should really check out how happy Bryan Adams is to sing Badlands.
Yeah.
He loved it. So yeah, that solo version of the Promised Land is incredible when
Yeah.
he really gets into it.
Yeah. I'm sure there's somewhere where he did Promised Land and Long Walk Home as a 1-2 punch.
Is it
Yeah.
Obama's inauguration?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe did. All right. Yes. Good stuff. As always, Craig, I could talk to you all day. Final thoughts and how can someone reach you?
Final thoughts are, if you love this album, you are already my friend. And if you haven't really given it a good listen to, which I find hard to believe among this crowd, maybe spend some time spinning it today. And look for my book in the spring, which is called An Unqualified Hockey Coach. There are going to be somewhere between 6 and 8 stories. I'm about to send it to beta readers. And there is a Bruce Springsteen story in there that I think people relate to. And all caps stories that justify an outrageous hat collection. Jesse loves it. I don't
I
think you
do.
need much. I don't think you need much more of
Yeah.
a recommendation than that. And thank you for having me on to talk about my favorite album. I'm really glad I got ahead of what must have been a lot of people signing up for this album.
Yeah, I know. I'm thrilled that we got to talk about it. Yes, and I love the fact that when you were on Music Talks with Terry, which was a great episode, you told the story that Jesse said basically what you do about that his podcast is my book except songs instead of caps. So that made
Yeah.
me very happy. Yeah, thank you, Craig. Yes, I recommend the book strongly. When you're trying to promote the new one, of course, just reach out and we'll have you on again and we'll talk about it. So I've done this a lot on this series of episodes. And so, listeners, I want you to clear your mind and open your heart. Put whatever version, whether you've got a CD, a album, you're doing it digital, but go back to that time. Think about this. It's been 3 or 4 years since we'd had new Bruce music, and you see this album with that iconic cover, and you open up the cellophane and you put it on the turntable, and think about what you heard when you started hearing those first notes, and go back to that mindset and re-explore this album. I think you're going to love it. Craig, thank you as always. I love talking to you, and I appreciate all the support. You're always one of my biggest cheerleaders, and that means the world to me. Hopefully, we're going to meet in person sometime. If
That would be incredible. Catch a
yes,
Bruce show or a baseball game. I thank you. In many ways, I think of you as the leader of the Bruce fans. There's a lot of podcasts about Bruce, but I think it's just says a lot about you that your podcast is about Bruce fandom and meeting the other people who love Bruce Springsteen. So I have great appreciation for you personally and what you're doing here.
thank you,
And
my.
on behalf of all of us Bruce Springsteen fans, I think.
I appreciate that, my friend. All right, listeners, go back, spend some time with darkness. Thank you for supporting this 30 for 30 project. I am at Jesse Jackson DFW on Twitter. You can find me Jesse Jackson on Facebook. And I do have a Patreon page. So if you go to Patreon, look for Set Lusting Bruce, and for as little as $1 a month, you can support the podcast. And what I'm trying to do is giving Springsteen fans a voice. So thank you for the kind words, Craig. Thank you, everyone, for the support. And for now, be safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.